to awaken such a creature. Dare kept running, an angry horde of snapping teeth and orange fur chasing him through the dimly lit, dense forest. The moon stared down at him blinkingly through the canopy, barely illuminating his path. He hurdled a low log, Vulpas's frame becoming heavier with each step in his arms, as his lungs began to raggedly suck in breath, yet the chasing horde didn't slow. Time was running out. His body simply couldn't continue at such a pace, especially while carrying another elf. His magic was low thanks to his use of it earlier, and he had lost his location in the forest, every tree blending into each other, ruining his sense of direction. As he ran, a low-hanging branch of green growth slapped him in the face, making his skin sting. The forest, however, seemed to be thinning, though it could easily be his imagination, so he kept sprinting from the blood-hungry group of foxes behind him. The forest was definitely thinning, and a small glade seemed to suddenly open before him. As he ran, he caught glimpses of the glade. A strange abundance of willow trees seemed to surround the border of it, and a fairy ring of mushrooms grew within its center. A mound of leaves, twigs, and debris seemed collected on one side, while grass grew knee-length. Finally, the glade was much brighter than the forest, due to the lack of canopy above. He caught his leg on something as he entered the glade. It was a stupid mistake, but with the high grass, seeing anything while running was now an impossible, and he tumbled on the ground, dropping Vulpas as he fell. A mass of scrambling and brushing of fur came charging through the emerald blades until a fox's snout burst from the grass wall he had fallen into. Within seconds, more appeared, surrounding him. "Is this truly how I perish? To a horde of angry foxes?" he thought, but suddenly they retreated, something making them whimper and run, abandoning even Vulpas in the grass beside Dare as quickly as they had appeared, leaving Dare stunned. Silence filled the glade. No birds sang, no animals called, no wind tickled the grass or the hanging drapes of the willows. Everything was still. Dare lay confused for a few seconds. Why did they run? I was sure my throat was about to be torn out. He struggled to stand, his lungs still screaming for air even as he gulped it down. Vulpas lay sprawled in the tall grass, almost buried. Dare leaned down to ensure he was okay. He seemed fine, except from being knocked out, but that was Dare's fault. After checking Vulpas's vitals, he took the opportunity to look around. Everything he had seen as he ran remained true, though now that he could actually look at his surroundings, he noticed that everything seemed lush, even for an elven forest. As he beheld the area in confusion, the stamp of a hoof surprised him, and he turned to find a stag eyeing him from the edge of the glade, its coat looking clean and strong. Its ear twitched, its head turning into the moonlight as it heard something he couldn't see in the forest, and he caught a glimpse of its antlers. They had formed the likeness of a tree, great pieces of bone twisting and twirling delicately, forming its trunk before reaching out in hundreds of small points to create branches. Whether magically cultivated, or simply a growth of the forest, Dare couldn't tell, and as he gently moved closer to the stag, in an attempt to see it better, it bucked and ran, turning away and disappearing into the dark trees. Around him, birds stayed silent, though he could see their feathers shift in the branches. He became aware of rabbits, badgers, and other woodland animals nearby, though they didn't move, instead sitting still and quiet, as if holding their breath with the forest as something he had done. After short consideration, he finally realized what was wrong. These animals are skittish. Nothing in this forest is scared of elves. He turned back, worried about his thought, and almost tripped once again on something within the grass. Bending down to examine it, he found a large stick that tapered to a point. The wood looked strange, however, as if something had taken a trunk and twisted it like a rope. He bent to pick it up, inquisitiveness getting the better of him, but before his hand could touch it, a swarm of buzzing echoed from within the stick, and a cascade of insects took flight. They blinded Dare. Flashing lights flared from their backs as they drifted into the air and hovered, covering the glade in 100 gleams of green. They spread out over the glade, enveloping it in a blanket of lights. He turned, following their flight with his eyes, as they illuminated the mound of twigs, leaves, and debris that he hadn't really paid attention to up until this point. As he stared, dumbfounded, the mound shifted, rising and widening as plant matter cascaded off it. A gnarled root, capped with claws, suddenly protruded from it as it grew, then half a wing-like shape rose above. A huge root formed a horn poking from one end, followed by a large and heavily bark-laden face tinted in an olive hue. Plant matter continued to fall from the new creature as it seemed to grow in size and rise in height until it almost reached the nearby treetops of the willows. Finally, before Dare, and looming above him, stood a deep green dragon. It looked at him, seemingly annoyed at the bipedal thing that had disturbed it. Its chest was large and heavy, covered in what looked like solidified roots that coalesced upon its chest and flowed back along its body, almost like a river of wood. A hooked chin and thick jawline seemed to have grown outwards slightly from its mouth, and 2 slits within the living wood glowed green upon its snout. 2 great wings spanned behind it, stretching out and blotting the sky. They seemed heavy, clearly not used for flying unless necessary, and were covered in slick, wet moss. It was, unmistakably, quadrupedal. 4 thick and stout legs made it stand proud. Its tail swept behind it, flexing along its length. He followed the tail, surprised by how long it was, until he found that it ended at the stick he had tripped upon. Everything connected, and he realized that the stick was its tail's end, as it raised up and snaked back behind the dragon. Its eyes glared at him, emerald pits of abundant wildness and ancientness. Years flowed through the dragon's eyes, as if rings within a tree, and they held Dare in place with their lurid stare. Something brushed against his legs, and a sharp nip upon his calf broke him from the dragon's eyes. Looking down, he found a snow-white fox, limping beside him carefully, a horde of other foxes behind him.
"Dare, kneel, if you value your life. Bow, and don't match his eyes until he leaves."
Alba's hackles were raised slightly, his tails flat between his legs. However, he didn't even attempt to turn away or move as the dragon's gaze slowly shifted onto the snow fox.
"Do it,"
Alba growled, before lowering his head to the dragon. Dare looked behind him and found that even the lesser-minded foxes were following Alba, lowering their heads in respect. He followed their example, kneeling before the ancient being and bowing his head. Silence once again filled the glade, until a single drip sounded beside Dare, as Alba's wound leaked a small orb of crimson onto the grass below. It seemed as if the silence held forever, until finally a huff sounded in front of them, the smell of lustrous plant growth flowing over Dare as the dragon turned and began walking into the tree line, slowly disappearing among the dark trunks. Beside him, Alba raised his eyes, checking for safety, before lifting his head from the bough and releasing a sigh of relief. Dare looked up himself, realizing the danger had passed, and watched as the last dragon faded into the trees, a glowing aura following it as the fireflies that seemed to reside within its tail traced their living home's travel into the trees.